So GPUs haven't been as exciting. Basically, the performance that we're getting every generation versus the price that we're paying is just barely getting any better, and leading to a lot of people, I'm not going to upgrade my GPU for 10 years this time because graphics cards suck. These feelings are completely justified. We could attest this to greed of a company like Nvidia, charging more for their graphics card. But this also seems to be an industry trend. All kinds of things are having issues where it seems like progress is slowing down significantly. And I just have a feeling that all these companies aren't exactly talking to each other and making like a huge monopoly controlling the market. I think genuinely there might be a problem. So if we compare the 13900K to the 12900K, 12900K scored 756. And then the 13900K scored 828. And then if we look at AMD, R9 7950X, their top-end consumer CPU, scored 851 for the last generation's highest top end. We got the 5950X, it scored 689. So there's a significant difference here with the performance. However, if we go to the power consumption of these chips, is it even better? That's what makes me wonder. 13900K, the 14900K, they draw like 280 290 watts. 12900K really isn't that far behind, but if we go to things like the 11900K at only 139 watts, we get a significant difference between those. But is it really better than an 11900K at 130 watts? That is such a significant power difference. It's insane. Don't think AMD's top-end CPUs really draw less power than Intel's. This is 250 watts. They're throwing all the power at the wall. If we look at the 5950X, it only draws 120 watts, literally half the power of the chip that's above it. And the chip that's above it isn't giving twice the performance. Like, it's not like every watt translates into more performance. Are CPUs actually getting faster, or are we just throwing more power at CPUs to make them perform better? And Intel literally has evidence that they've been pushing their CPUs too hard because CPUs seem to be degrading by how much power they're throwing at them. This is not sustainable. And this is one of the reasons why the Ryzen 7800X3D, I love this CPU, is so amazing, because it does a lot of the things that these other chips do. Like the 7800X3D is one of the top end chips here. But then if we go again to the power consumption, the 7800X3D is really, really low down on here. It's only at 86 watts compared to those CPUs. It provides a lot of performance at a much lower power draw. And a lot of people can appreciate that because it's easier to cool. It just means that there's more headroom to improve performance in the future, all that kind of stuff. But the only problem with the 7800X3D is it really only applies to gaming. So then Nvidia saying this is starting to make a lot more sense.
Moore's law is probably currently running at about 2 times.
I would also say, Moore's law is dead.
Moore's law basically describes how many more transistors that we're able to shove into our beloved processors. Transistors are the building blocks that allow these CPUs, these processors to do the calculations that make our computers run. So usually if you have more transistors on your CPU, GPU, it usually equals better. And it makes you wonder, where do we go if progress gets so unimpactful every generation that people start upgrading their GPUs every 20 years at that point? And it makes me think that the answer is to just start over how we're making our processors. And that's what brings me to Apple's M3, M3 Pro, M3 Max. I know we're a PC channel, and seeing Apple processors is probably criminal, but if we're all being honest here, these processors are some of the most exciting things that we've seen in the chip manufacturer tech space in years. These came out in 2020 and completely shook up the atmosphere. This is a video from Optimum Tech. He took Apple's fastest Mac PC, the Mac Studio, versus his top-end Windows PC. The Mac Studio was only drawing 12 watts compared to 94 watts, just doing nothing on the Windows PC. He was getting better power efficiency. The Mac Studio was performing better in Cinebench and getting 106 watts versus 158 watts. And if you talk about Cinebench and single-threaded, this shows your performance basically per watt. 27 watts on the Mac Studio versus 102 watts on the PC. So the PC is drawing exponentially more power to do the same things or even worse things than what the Mac Studio is able to do. And that's all in part of thanks because of these Apple M series series chips. That power efficiency translates into other things. So like say for laptops, efficient laptop that's good on battery is really important. If we look at here, this is the Intel's newest processors that have literally cores built into them to draw as little power as possible, just so that they can get better marks in these kind of benchmarks and just last better for every daily use. And these things were only just barely matching the Apple M2 chip. It's the purple, it's the magenta one, and the Apple M2 is just like at least all the way up there in terms of battery life with these other laptops. But when you look over here, this is the catch. Apple's M2 Air only has a 53 watt hour battery, whereas all of these other laptops have a 75 watt hour battery. So it's matching their battery life on less battery. So that means it's just more efficient. It's just better. M series chips are completely killing Intel and AMD in terms of power efficiency, even at times in terms of performance. Technically, Optimum could have chose a better CPU for the production stuff here, but still, it's pretty amazing. This can be attested to a few things because Apple is able to do vertical integration because Apple owns the entire ecosystem. They own macOS, they own the hardware that they're putting in into their machines, they are also designing the chips specifically to work with things that they wanted to make the most use out of. All that kind of stuff. They can optimize their systems completely with vertical integration. But another reason why these M series chips have such good power efficiency, which matters a lot if we want to push the power draw of our CPUs and stuff, because that's what we're doing currently, is because these M series chips work on ARM architecture. And just to give you an idea, it's not just Apple who thinks ARM is very, very powerful. ARM is its own company. And NVIDIA, you know, probably the most valuable chip maker in the world right now, tried to acquire ARM for $40 billion back in 2020. And just to give you an idea of how major this deal was, it was shut down because it was thought to be a monopoly, or it might be a monopoly if NVIDIA tried to go through with this. So in 2022, they shut it down because ARM is seriously that powerful. And when you look at what NVIDIA has been doing as well, their top-end chips, you know, their Grace Hopper chips, also they're making their Blackwell chips soon. These CPUs that are in those super chips, those ones are built on ARM architecture. The fastest ARM data center CPU is the NVIDIA Grace CPU. You know, as much as you might want to hate NVIDIA for, you know, how they charge you for their graphics cards and stuff, NVIDIA knows what they're doing. And if they're using ARM on the top end, that definitely says something about the potential of how CPUs, processors are going to work in the future. And I really think to explain why ARM is actually game changing, I think we also need to explain why the current architecture that we're working on can be so bad. You might have seen this little symbol on your file explorer in Windows. That x86, that's what most likely your PC architecture is based on. It's basically how the operating system and programs that you actually want to use on your computer, they see how they recognize that chunk of silicon that is on your motherboard. That's how that makes instructions to work with it. It needs to know what architecture it's based on. It is very, very old. Because x86 dates all the way back to 1978. x86 as an architecture is 46 years old now. That's midlife crisis moment. 1985 was 32-bit, 2003 introduced 64-bit processors, which we're on typically right now. And it was based originally on Intel's 8086 processor, which came out so long ago. To me, that screams that there's probably a lot of bloat, that we've had to adapt things over time. It really reminds me of having to adapt like an old house. Like for example, right now I am remodeling the bathroom that's actually above my room, and there's all this old stuff in here. My house that I live in, built in the 1940s. So there's all this legacy stuff in the house. There's all these bones that you gotta fix up. And like when I was tearing out pipes and stuff, I found out that the old cast iron pipes were rusted out and they were just leaking out. I look at all the electrical work and there's just like these junction boxes sitting in the walls, just people adapting things over time to get it to work. But every single time that you adapt, say an old electric system to a new one, you have issues that you don't really always realize is limiting, say, the house could do, or what the most efficient design for that house should be. And it makes you wonder if all this bloat, saying with these x86 processors, is really slowing us down or making our processors, it's handicapping what they can do because of, say, the legacy stuff they have to do on them. A lot of people probably argue that we just ignore all this legacy stuff that's on these x86 processors. There has to be something still sticking around on these chips that doesn't really have to be there. Because if we look at the instruction set that x86 uses, it's called CISC. It literally has complex instruction set computer in its name. To me, it signals that there's probably something that's a little bit too complex in there that we could probably simplify. You can just see how much documentation there is for Intel's x86 architecture. There's another issue with x86 that maybe not that many people are talking about. It also is licensed out by Intel. Intel owns majority of the rights on x86, and the only other company that has any license to make x86 processors to any significant degree is AMD. But that's why we only see Intel and AMD competing in the CPU space. And to me, that's a lot of a problem in terms of competition. It's actually a really funny story of why Intel even allows AMD to make x86 processors. Because you would think Intel as a company, they own x86. Why the heck would they even allow AMD to work on this stuff? Intel had an agreement with AMD that there'd be a second source of x86 chips. And that's because, this is the real reason, large companies like HP and IBM won't design in parts that are only from a single source. Basically, these companies told Intel that if it's only Intel making these chips, they know that something's going to happen, putting their bets on them in the future. So they wanted another company like AMD to keep innovating. And we saw that in the mid-2010s when Intel stopped innovating and AMD took up that flag. That agreement was apparently drunkenly written on the back of a cocktail napkin, as AMD has been able to stretch that ancient agreement to cover newer chips in the future. And Intel has tried to exert so much muscle that they paid over $2 billion in fines for stomping around too hard. So Intel regrets allowing AMD to make x86 processors, especially nowadays, because AMD has been kind of whipping Intel's ass in terms of CPUs right now. These x86 processors are still extremely fast. I think we all know that. But is x86 hitting its limits that we can't make the silicon itself that much faster? So right now we're pushing power limits and stuff. Could we strip away all of that legacy stuff to make these processors work a lot more efficiently? And that is where we introduce ARM. Now, ARM stands for Advanced RISC Machine. RISC is an instruction set. So, we talked about x86 that uses CISC, which is a complex instruction set CPU or computer. RISC stands for Reduced Instruction Set Computer. As you read that, it sounds like it'd be way less complex to make a RISC computer than a complex CISC computer. This ARM architecture is the same kind of stuff that's on Apple M series and all your smartphones and stuff right now, your Snapdragon chips from Qualcomm. Everything is built on ARM. RISC is royalty free. And yes, it's open. And I'm pretty sure you can just work with it. Like there's stuff that you can download and just work on it. Absolutely huge, because the licensing thing on x86 can be really restricting. I know when I made this video recently where somebody made their own GPU, and it starts to make you wonder, he's going to take his GPU open source so that people can work on it. And there's so many people in the comments. This could be a stepping stone for the future of open source GPUs. He should be incredibly proud of what he did all by himself. Open source software plus open source hardware. This needs to happen if you want anything good to happen in your life. Obviously, people really like open source software. I use Open Broadcaster software, OBS, to record videos. FSR, AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution, that it is open source and people can work with it. People absolutely love open source because you can make so much innovation. Basically, the entire world can work on it, though it might be a little bit more disorganized. And another part of it being reduced instruction set computers can reduce a lot of bloat that's on your system. And this efficiency with ARM has benefited a lot of devices like your phones, consoles like the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation Vita from a long time ago. These are built on ARM processors that's able to make them more power efficient. Now you might look at the Switch and be like, oh, the Switch isn't that powerful, but it's very quiet, it's very power efficient, and that can definitely go a long way when you're using a handheld device that you're gonna be sitting right next to. And then tablets use ARM devices, and even Apple laptops, Apple iPads, and then many devices like the Steam Deck or even Windows laptops that also benefit greatly from having more efficient chips in them. Think of a Steam Deck that doesn't have to use x86, draws less power. We could either translate pumping as much power into it as we were before, allowing it to push out more performance, or we can take advantage of that and give it more battery life. That is a huge thing that x86 processors on the Steam Deck kind of holds it back. Windows laptops, compared to Apple laptops nowadays, like Intel's new processors on Meteor Lake on their laptops have these low power efficiency cores, and they have to jump through all these hoops to make it work and be as power efficient as Apple laptops nowadays. Many people have switched to Apple MacBooks just because of their power efficiency. So Windows laptops could benefit greatly from having more power efficient CPUs. I know I would love my laptop to last for 10, 12 hours. That's awesome. On the other side of it, you might not think that this is true, but desktop PCs could also benefit from more efficient CPUs. And it sounds stupid because plugged into a wall, why would you need that on a desktop PC? But if you think about it, we're pushing power limits on CPUs of x86 far as they can go right now. Look at Intel's 350 watt processors. That is not sustainable. What we could do with ARM, because they're more power efficient, more headroom to push the power up. This could allow us to get more performance out of our processors. Now, this could also lead to a situation where we just get limited by power in the future. But think about an ARM chip right now that is pushed all the way to the gills. Imagine if Apple decided to push their top-end ARM chip further than it ever has before.
But I actually have another complaint. The Mac Studio, even with the M2 Ultra, which is the top spec, most power-hungry chip they have, is too quiet. Like, this thing is unreasonably silent. Now, on one hand, that is super impressive. Like, to have a machine that is this small, this powerful, and have like basically no noise, that is just kind of next level. But at the same time, this is the fastest Mac Studio. I wouldn't have minded if Apple just let the thing cook a little bit harder.
This could be the next level of computing, even for desktop PCs. You usually wouldn't associate with having power limits, but they definitely are power limited right now. Then another thing adding on to this, because it's open source, royalty free, anyone can really use it, that means we get a ton of competition. Instead of having just Intel and AMD making processors, companies like Samsung making ARM processors, which they have been for a while. Obviously, Apple is making ARM processors. We see MediaTek, which might not be associated with the best chips in the world, is making ARM processors. It really makes an arms race when you think of it. Even Google is making their Tensor chips for their phones, and Google's also expanding into data center with AI-based ARM chips. NVIDIA and AMD plan to make ARM PC chips as soon as 2025. Intel themselves, even though they've actually gone on record to say they don't think ARM is going to matter, that might be a little bit insecurity, Intel is going to be manufacturing and fabricating ARM chips for these companies. So there's clearly a huge congregation of companies working open source. There's so much competition, and that's what we love to see as a consumer, because we can see which one actually comes out on top. Plus, there is the big one. Qualcomm and their SnapDragon X Elite processor is going to be on laptop Windows PCs in the future here. And according to benchmarks that Snapdragon has put out, Qualcomm as a company, that this is faster than other competing x86 processors while being more power efficient at the same time, which means that our Windows laptops just in this year could be a lot better. Super cool. I'm super excited for this Snapdragon X Elite processor. I might have to get a laptop with it in it just to try it to see if it's really that good. But that also brings me to the negatives. ARM isn't just better and we slap it in our computers and it just works, There's going to be some hurdles to jump through because Windows is built on x86. Windows would need to be built on ARM architecture in order to make it better. We've seen what Apple has had to go through with macOS to make their M series chips work on it. There's been translation layers like called Rosetta that translates x86 that had their old Intel chips compared to their ARM chips now. And then a lot of companies have eventually been able to make their programs to work natively on ARM. But Windows on ARM has been around for a while, and it's only just getting pretty good. Like, people are daily driving Windows on ARM, because this guy here says on Reddit, he says Windows on ARM user since 2019, and he wanted to add a little bit of context. These are the type of things that work well on ARM. So all of the inbox applications for Windows, Notepad, Media Player, Microsoft Store, Camera, OneDrive, Phone Link, Xbox, Microsoft Office works on ARM, Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom, and other Adobe Creative Cloud Suite. Other creative apps like Luminar Neo, Paint.net and GIMP. Major browsers like Edge, Firefox, Brave, and now Chrome. Like if an app doesn't work on ARM, apparently the emulation x86 architecture on ARM is supposed to be getting pretty good over time. I can't attest to this if it's good or not. Windows also does provide tools for companies to translate their x86 apps into ARM-based apps. And we want this transition for people to start using ARM processors, like I would want to too. Then it needs to go smoothly in order for things to function properly. But generally speaking, the Windows on ARM experience is generally getting pretty good. And maybe the only thing that we've been waiting on is a chip that can take advantage of it, like the SnapDragon X Elite. And the other thing that concerns me about ARM is kind of the core of what, at least in the PC space, of what really makes PC what it is. And it's part of that is your upgradability. You can swap out your RAM, your graphics card, your CPU itself. How is that going to work on ARM? Because when we think about other processors or ARM processors that we've seen, they've always been soldered to motherboards. They, generally speaking, I don't think I've ever had upgradable RAM in there. If you have a motherboard, are you going to have to buy a motherboard that has both the SOC, so the system on a chip, built into the motherboard? Does that combine the entire thing? Can you not upgrade at that point in time? Would it be more expensive to buy the bundle of both the processor motherboard combined together? How is that going to work? Is there going to be upgradable RAM at all? Is this just like an architectural thing that you have to have the guaranteed amount of RAM soldered onto the board? Is this going to be used to strong arm us into consumer unfriendly marketing where we have to buy more than we would think we'd want to buy and we can't upgrade it in the future? It's kind of like how a lot of laptops are right now. How is that going to go? Most major concern. Although I will say, in terms of GPU support, like it's possible that we're going to be able to plug in a GPU to an ARM processor through PCIe, just like we would on an x86 system, because we have seen things like NVIDIA and MediaTek working together, being able to use NVIDIA GPUs plugged in to MediaTek chips. So that's possible, but I'm not 100% sure how it's going to work. But clearly, ARM is a very powerful thing. Just seeing all these companies investing into it, it looks like this might be the future, that our x86 CPUs that we work with right now, we're just pushing the power limits on them. Are they actually getting better? Does something major need to happen? Is ARM that thing that's super major to happen? They're more power efficient, open source as well, so a lot of competition is going to come into this space. We're going to see innovation, and things are going to start moving very quickly, especially with Windows on ARM working a lot better on these chips. I'm very excited about ARM. I'll have to try it for myself, but every ARM device that I have or have used has been great. I'm excited for the future of this, and I'm thinking it might be the future of processors, even though Intel likes to say that it's not. Let me know what you think about ARM. Are you scared that your processor is going to be irrelevant in just a few years? All right, I'm gonna see you guys in the next one. Have a good one. Peace.